Today we're making apple chips, and even though there isn't just one way to do this, I'm going to give you a lot of options of how to accomplish making them. We're going to start out with different varieties of apples. You can use one or many. I have a Honeycrisp, an Opal, a Granny Smith, and a Fuji apple. I'll show you multiple ways of cutting them. You can use a mandolin or you can use a chef knife. We can do this with no sugar, or we can add a little bit of the simple syrup that we made for our last recipe. I could use a little bit of powdered sugar, and if you'd like spice, you can use a little bit of cinnamon. So I'm going to show you multiple ways to accomplish this. You're going to want either a silicone mat lined on a sheet pan, or you can use parchment paper, and I suggest you spray it lightly with some pan spray or maybe some coconut oil to prevent the slices from sticking. You can also use your dehydrator trays if you have that available. That will work fantastic as well. When you're ready to slice your apples, choose the direction you'd like to go. I either want to go with the silhouette of the apple here, or I can go in slices in rounds here, which will take on this shape. There's no right answer, it's just whatever you prefer. Whichever direction you want to go, you want to take a nice slice off to make it nice and flat. So if you're going to continue to use your knife, you want to have a steady hand here, your fingers pulled back, and you want to try and slice about 1/8 of an inch thick all the way through. Take your time to do this so that they're nice even slices all the way through. It's going to be a little harder to make it exactly perfect and even, and it takes some practice. If you'd like to use a mandolin, you can go ahead and slice it here. But you see the issue that I'm having with this apple is that it's a little too wide for this particular mandolin. If you have a different style that fits, go ahead and use it that way. I'll try my smaller apples on the mandolin, and I'll continue slicing this one by hand. If you go this direction, you see that you get these beautiful star shapes in the center. I don't core my apples, but if you'd like to, you can use a cookie cutter or an apple corer prior to be able to do that. Now sometimes, if you're not paying attention, like now, you get little pieces like that. You can still dry them, but they might get a little too crispy. So try your best to cut through that core and to get a nice slice. Now if you'd like to use the mandolin, you can use the mandolin going the same direction that I just did, or you can turn the apple, cut a nice solid piece off, and then go ahead and slice your slices. This is going to give you an absolute much thinner slice than what I did before, because it's easier to cut the mandolin than by hand, which means this will take less time to dry out in the oven or in your dehydrator than this type of slice. So keep that in mind and choose which direction you'd like to go. Preparing our apple slices now, we want to lay them flat, pretty much right next to each other on, again, a silicone mat or a parchment lined sheet pan. The parchment, make sure you spray with just a little bit of baking spray or a little bit of oil. And you can see here I have one that's thicker and one that's thinner. So that means these are going to bake at different times. So you really need to pay attention to these and pull them when they are ready. The mandolin that I have is a little too skinny to slice these apples on there, which I did not realize today. So therefore I had to do these by hand and need a little bit more practice. So you can place all of these apple slices out. You can also use a dehydrator, and that will work fine. And so you can put different varieties right next to each other, whatever you like. They should all bake around the same time. So you can use this style, you can use the round. These really make beautiful apple chips for garnish for a plated dessert. If you're just gonna eat them for fun, you can make whatever size you like, but I really like the wow factor of this sticking in the side of a dessert. It looks really great. So we will continue doing this. Now you can bake them just as is. You can sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon on top, Or if you'd like a little shine when they come out of the oven, we can add a tiny bit of simple syrup to each one and kind of just brush it on top, and that will give a beautiful shine. Be careful, because if your temperature is too high, then it will burn this extra sugar. Remember, apples have a tremendous amount of sugar that when it dehydrates, it concentrates the sugar and then it will start to caramelize. So that's why we want to keep it at a very, very low temperature. If you don't have any more of that simple syrup that you saved, you can always use a little bit of powdered sugar, dust it on top. It's going to dissolve immediately because the apple is wet. But this will help give a nice little shine and obviously a little bit of sweetness. It is absolutely not necessary if you're just making these as a snack, but I do like the look of it for plated desserts. You can turn these over and do them on the other side or just on the single side, whatever your desire is. So these are gonna go into the oven as low of a temperature as it will go, and I'm gonna monitor it. And depending on how thick or thin your slices are, it could take anywhere from an hour and a half to 6 hours. It really, again, just depends. So keep your eye on it, look for the color, make sure that it's not getting too dark brown. I'll most likely end up taking a couple of these off before the other ones are finished, and then those will be our apple chips. If you'd like to do little cinnamon or any other spice for that matter, ginger would be amazing with this. Even some of that fennel pollen, sprinkle on top here. You can do this, you can mix it in, whatever your desire. We'll be making fruit leather now, and this is where you can use any fruit that you like, but keep in mind the fibrous texture of each fruit. So apples and pears are going to contain a lot of firmer fiber, which is going to give you almost a grainy texture to your product. Use a little bit softer fruit, and you can use in combination if you like. I'm using blueberries and cherries for this batch, and I'm going to make another batch using strawberries and mixed berries. Frozen fruit is just fine. Fresh fruit is just fine. It's really up to you, and you can kind of create your own blends throughout the different seasons of the year. You can keep this as simple as using just the fruit itself and relying on the sugar content of the fruit to sweeten it, and also the pectin content of certain fruits to be able to give you that pliability. In this case, I'm probably going to add a little bit of lemon juice to help brighten up the flavor. And if it needs any sweetness, I can add sugar, agave, simple syrup, any sort of sweetness that you like. We do have leftover simple syrup from candied fruits, and this one happens to be the lemon. So this will kill two birds with one stone and give me my acidity and my sweetness at the same time. So I can go ahead and do that. The first thing we want to do is puree our fruits. So I'm going to place this in a blender and puree them. If they are frozen, you can let them sit for a little while so that they are soft and it doesn't become a smoothie, it becomes an actual puree. And then we will taste the fruit mixture and go ahead and add sweetness as desired. My purees are finished. Make sure that you really puree them well so they emulsify and they don't separate then when you bake them. They'll have a tendency to kind of crack if you don't get all of your puree super smooth. So you can see this one's really glossy. This is my blueberry cherry. And then this one is the strawberry with a few mixed berries in there as well. My strawberry is a little bit tartar, so I'm gonna actually add some simple syrup to it and then taste along the way. The blueberry is pretty good, but I just want a shot of that lemon. So I'm gonna add just a little bit, but this is how you wanna taste for it. So my fruit is still cold and it will actually taste, the colder it gets, the more you kind of suppress the sweetness. Remember, this is gonna be served at room temperature, so you can wait till your fruit gets room temperature and then it'll be more true to the flavor. And it's gonna dehydrate all of the moisture out, so you will be concentrating the sugars in there. So now I really taste the strawberry really coming out. Again, it's gonna depend on the brand of fruit you buy, the season that you're buying fresh fruit in. If you're buying frozen, generally it's gonna be at the peak of its freshness, but you just never know depending on which brand. So add a little bit if you like. If you like it the way it tastes, you don't need to add anything at all. So you season both of them. And two ways of preparing this. Number one is on a silicone mat. This is the best way that I find. If you don't have a silicone mat, you can use parchment, but make sure you do use some sort of pan spray or coconut oil or regular oil to grease the pan just a little bit so that when you try and pull this off of there, it's not going to stick. So what I want to do is I want to pour some of this on here. Most likely this will take 2 pans worth of space. If you try and pour this too thick, then what's going to happen is that it'll take, first of all, forever to dry out. And then it will kind of potentially, if you don't do this evenly enough, it will be thin on the outside and thicker on the inside. So make sure your sheet pans are flat. And then you want to go ahead and turn your sheet pan and use your offset spatula to spread this out to the edges. I'm trying not to touch, well, it can touch the edge, that's fine. We'll score it later on. So make sure that your silicone mat really does go pretty much to the edge. Spreading this out nice and evenly. If you feel like you poured too much, you can take some out. If you like a thin leather, a thicker leather, remember it will dehydrate it, so it's not going to be this thick in the end. So once I've done this, I can tap it down to make sure it's totally even. You can see it. There's really nothing, no lines in it. And then this is ready to go into the oven. This again, just like the apple chips or if you want to do pear chips, the lowest temperature possible, and we're just going to dry this out. I'm also going to do a batch in my dehydrator. I find that works a little bit more where I don't have to keep my eye on it as much. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple sheets in the dehydrator as well, and then we'll check it out when it's finished. These are my dehydrator sheets prepared, ready to go to turn them on. I've got one of the strawberry and one of the blueberry. Again, you can do any fruit flavors you want. Just be careful of things like citrus, watermelon, things that contain too much water and not enough fiber. So you're really looking for a beautiful puree. And so we'll visit this in a couple hours. My fruit leather that was in the dehydrator is definitely done first. And so what you want to do is make sure that you loosen it a little, and then you can just peel strips off of here like this. Now because mine is in a circle, it's harder to get absolutely perfect strips and then go ahead and roll them up on paper. But this, you can just tear in random pieces, and then when you do a dessert, you can go ahead and make like a fan. So it has a really beautiful kind of look to it when you plate the dessert. So you can do this now, and then place it in an airtight container so that you have your decorations ready when you put it on. So this is very abstract. Again, these are for decorations. You can definitely eat the rest, but not meant to be rolled up in strips like you would for like a lunchbox. So I'm gonna go ahead and do these in my strawberry and my blueberry. And you want them to be nice and pliable. If you go too far in the oven or the dehydrator, they will get very crispy. And you also notice how thin this is. My puree was on the thicker side when I placed it in here because the majority of it is water. So we have to make sure we accommodate for that and not to make the puree too thin on here when you start to dry it out, because otherwise you'll end up with a fruit crisp leather, which we don't want. It's more of a chip, and we want this to be able to hold its shape and be nice and kind of leathery. Now, if it is too wet, this little portion here is a little wet, that has a potential for molding if you don't use this right away. So make sure this is dried out, the sugars are sufficiently concentrated, and then it should have a shelf life of about a week or 2. After quite a few hours in the oven, my chips and my fruit leather are done. The apple chips will always seem a little soft when it comes out until they completely cool, and then they'll get crispy. But this is what they should look like, and then you can store these in a nice airtight container. They should keep for about a week or 2. Again, if they start to get kind of soggy and bendable, then you can just dry them out in the oven again. When it comes to the fruit leather, this is the one on the silicone mat. You can literally just kind of take it and pull it off of the mat, which is so great, so much better than parchment paper. So you can lift it off of here, and then if you'd like to, you can cut on this only with like a pizza cutter. You do not want to use a knife on a silicone mat, you will ruin it. So it's totally up to you whether you would like to rip it into random pieces, or if you were interested in doing strips. You want to release it from one side so that you can pull off the leather like that. And if you want to cut it into kind of strips, you can go with the pizza wheel. You can even cut pieces of parchment paper on top, and then that did not cut all the way through. And then you can pull the pieces. Probably should cut a little further than that. A little bit firmer, and then your strip will come right off, just like that. You can roll them up, you can make those flowers like I was saying earlier. If you wanted to do a big portion onto a piece of a dessert, that is a really cool garnish. So your fruit leather, your fruit chips, any flavor you want, have fun.